From Deloitte Tax, welcome to the Tax News and Views podcast. In this series, we talk to specialists from Deloitte about the latest business issues. I'm Carrie Falkenhayn, your host for Tax News and Views. And today we're recording a special edition focused on two recent tax policy developments. In particular, the tax provisions related to the debt ceiling increase and the economic growth tax package unveiled by the House Ways and Means Chairman. I'm happy to introduce two guests today for this special edition. We're joined by John Traub from Deloitte's Tax Policy Group. I'm sure many of you have heard him before, but we're also joined by Ann Taylor, who's also been on before, but is a more recent addition to Deloitte's Tax Policy Group. Welcome, both of you. Glad to have you here. And Anna, let's start with you. Let's look back just what feels like a minute. Congress and the president managed to raise the debt ceiling with just a day or two to spare. But of course, it was not without some drama. Can you talk about what the Democrats gave up, especially around the IRS funding to get the deal?
Sure. So if you think back to the beginning of this conversation earlier in the year, Democrats initially said they weren't going to negotiate at all, that the debt ceiling needed to be passed clean and there could be a separate conversation about any sort of budget reforms. Well, ultimately, House Republicans were able to receive significant budget concessions from Democrats in this negotiation, the biggest being a more than 25% cut in the IRS funding that had been enacted last year as part of the Inflation Reduction Act. So I think that is a concession Democrats did not want to make, and ultimately they did. So what the impact of that cut means for the IRS programs going forward is yet to be determined. You have some in the administration saying money is fungible and they can move years up to start programs that they wanted to go ahead and start anyway. I don't know if it's that simple, and we'll have to see.
So still more to come on how that IRA money will get allocated ultimately. So more questions there. All right. So also this past week, the House Ways and Means Committee, the chairman introduced a package. I guess we expect that the House Ways and Means Committee will approve this package of tax bills. So maybe, John, you can talk a little bit about what is in them and what do people need to know.
Yeah, so Ways and Means Chairman Jason Smith of Missouri has been talking for some time about his desire to have an economic growth-focused package. And he rolled it out last week, and it had it's three bills that will roll up together into one that the Ways and Means Committee is supposed to consider on Tuesday, the 13th of June, the day we're recording this. It's expected to be a pretty contentious markup as Democrats offer lots and lots of amendments. But the key things to note are that the expired pieces of TCJA, notably 174, 163J, and bonus depreciation are all made retroactive back, extended retroactively, and extended through the end of 2025 to line up with other expiring pieces of TCJA, like the 199A cliff. There are new foreign tax credit rules to encourage companies to move production to the Western Hemisphere to override the administration's foreign tax credit rules to encourage companies to move out of China and move production back towards nearshoring. There's a temporary increase for middle-income families in the standard deduction, now called the guaranteed deduction. This is a quasi-proxy for SALT relief. There's no actual SALT relief in the bill, but instead, middle-income and upper-middle-income families are getting a larger standard deduction. There are 1099 fixes to both repeal the provision for the American Rescue Plan that lowered the 1099K reporting threshold down to $600, and there's also a more broad provision that raises the threshold for 1099s for employees to, I think, $5,000, a figure that hasn't been changed from its current level since, I think, 1954. There's more expensing available for small businesses. There's a new excise tax on farmland being bought by citizens of countries of concern. This is a ongoing GOP concern about agricultural land being bought up by especially places like China, et cetera. And then there's a perennial favorite of repealing various energy credits from the IRA. This is a way Republicans pay for most of, but not all the cost of the bill. The IRA repeals have become the gift that keeps on giving. They will continue to be used in House bills and continue to be rejected by the Senate, we think, although I guess it's possible at some point some of these find their way into law. But for now, at least, they get to be their revenue raisers Republicans can use and reuse over again. And again, that package is going to be passed, we think, in the Ways and Means Committee sometime late tonight. And then we would expect to go to the floor of the House sometime, probably before the July 4th recess.
Got it. And so lots of tax provisions that you talked about, either extending or new or changes to existing rules. But I didn't hear you talk about anything really in response to the OECD Pillar 2 requirements. Even though it's not part of the package of bills that they are considering this week, how are House Republicans approaching this issue?
Yeah, there are the stages of grief, which goes from denial and anger to bargaining and finally acceptance. And Republicans in the House are in the anger phase of the stages of grief about Pillar 2. They are mad as heck at Janet Yellen for what they think is cutting a bad deal. They're mad at the Europeans for basically trying to tax American companies on American income via the UTPR mechanism. And they rolled out a bill last month that would essentially raise the rate of tax on citizens, including corporate citizens of countries that impose a UTPR on American firms. It would raise their rate of tax by 5 percentage points every year for up to 4 years until it reaches basically a 20 percentage point increase in their rate as punishment for imposing UTPR on American firms. This is not something we expect to see become law, but it is an interesting placeholder in the short term and shows that Republicans are very angry about this. And it's something we should all keep in mind if the elections in November of 2024 produce unified GOP control of government. This is the kind of retaliatory, hit them in the face kind of action we can expect America to actually adopt in response to other countries moving forward on UTPR.
So not a part of the current package of bills, but something that we got to keep our eyes open to and looking for in the future.
Yes, for sure.
Okay, Anna, John said that we should expect some version of the tax bills that were introduced to be passed later by the House Ways and Means Committee. That's just the start of becoming legislation. Ultimately, could these bills pass the Senate? And what should we be looking for later on this year?
Well, not likely in their current form as they've been introduced in the Ways and Means Committee. I think the biggest problem for Democrats is going to be the repeal of the various Inflation Reduction Act energy credits. And there's not enough for children and families, specifically with respect to expansion of the child tax credit as well. So I think Democrats have their own priorities in a package like this that they're going to be talking about in the weeks ahead. Is this the basis for some sort of bipartisan, bicameral negotiation later in the year? I think a lot of folks are hopeful that it is the first step in that process. And we'll see Senate Democrats put their stamp on their own version of a package that can then be negotiated between Ways and Means and Senate Finance later in the year. So fingers crossed, this is the beginning of a process, but definitely in its current form, it's going to run into problems in the Senate.
And I think it's worth pointing out that I think we both are pretty optimistic at this point that at some point later in calendar year 2023, we're going to see the House and Senate and the President agree on a package that includes a retroactive fix at least of 174 and probably at this point also of 163J and bonus, but 174 sort of leading the way on that. And again, there's a lot of work to be done, especially around Democrats' concerns around the child tax credit, but the basis for what could become law seems like it sort of raises our expectation that the 174 at least, and probably the other two also get done before the end of the year, retroactive to 1/1/22.
I agree with that. I think that's right. I do think that there will need to be some sort of balance in that package to go along with the business provisions like 174, some individual relief. But I think that there's the new chairman of Ways and Means has indicated a willingness to have that conversation. So I'm also optimistic.
Well, that will certainly be of interest to many of our listeners. So I'm certain that we will be talking again as those events continue to unfold. And I look forward to that and seeing what the next wave of activity from a tax policy perspective is. So more to come. If our audience would like more information, you can subscribe to the email version of Tax News and Views. Just go to Deloitte.com and search for Tax News and Views. You can also connect with John and Anna directly via LinkedIn. And of course, we hope you continue to tune in here for future policy editions. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining us. I hope everyone continues to be well.